Welcome to How the Song Came to Be, where soulful songwriters share the stories behind their songs, as well as tools and creative practices you can use to bring your best songs or other creative works to life. I'm Ann Heaton, your host.
I always had that guilt about, like, this whole artist guilt of, like, why do you deserve to be doing this? And so I had to make myself super busy all the time in order to justify my existence as an artist.
Welcome to How the Song Came to Be. I'm Ann Heaton, and we're here with Alex Wong, multi-instrumentalist, singer-songwriter, and record producer. Alex has produced records for artists such as Delta Rae, Vienna, Teng, Slankard, and now myself. He has been a writing member of the bands The Animators with Devon and with the paper Raincoat with Amber Rubarth, and he is an incredible singer-songwriter and puts out his own records as well. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yay! I'm so happy you're here. So
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So there's a lot that I want to ask you about. I'm particularly excited to ask you about production and getting in a particular mindset before you go in to record, kind of getting in a zone, because I know you are an expert at that. And but before we kind of dive into that, I know you're going to have tips to share and you're going to enlighten us about that. Before we dive into that, I'd love to ask you what I ask everyone when we start the show, which is, what compelled you to start writing songs?
The answer that popped into my head when you told me that question was Fake Plastic Trees by Radiohead.
Wow.
I remember hearing that song, and I had been playing in a band. It was my first. I had like a backwards music journey, I guess, to some people, where I didn't listen to really any pop or any cool music until, I guess, probably college is the first time that I met people who were cool and showed me music they were really into, and that really first really affected me. And I was mostly playing in sort of classical music orchestras and listening to classical music, and then terrible whatever anyone would tell me to listen to, pop music, in high school. So I didn't feel like I really had developed taste yet, and I had been playing in this band, and they were very influenced by kind of British Britpop and the Verve and Blur and The Cure and Smiths and that sort of thing. So that actually became my first love one of my first loves in music. And so I got pretty through them. I was not writing yet. I was the drummer in the band, and so it was kind of a crash course in lots of things. But they were not, I was in music school at the time, and they were all kind of self-taught musicians. And so there was this equal disdain coming from my music department towards sort of playing in a rock band. And then on the other side, these guys being like, you're not going to learn anything useful in school. And this is, so it was sort of this weird crash course on both directions, but they showed me a lot of music and the way that they kind of, music that, and how they found music and got really, what made them passionate. And it was just sort of from a listener's perspective, from a fan perspective, from a kid playing guitar perspective. And that was new to me, kind of just that whole, soaking in your heroes and this sort of thing. And I kind of got I caught some of that for the first time. And so one of my first bands that I was really just a complete fanboy of was Radiohead. And the record, The Bends, had come out, and I was obsessed with everything about that record, everything about that band, and that song was one of the first songs that really like just absolutely destroyed me and made me, you know, wonder if I could ever write a song anywhere close to that song, you know. And it just became kind of a goal that I never even really thought about achieving. It was just kind of like out there in the, you know, in the distance. And so that was definitely, I mean, you know, I just loved how it affected me, and I wanted to see, I wanted to see if I could participate in that with someone, you know, with other people, and express myself that way. And it was a long journey since that point. Like,
oh my gosh,
you know, but that definitely was a big starter.
Isn't it amazing how like there can be like just this moment or this artist or this band? I mean, did you think to yourself like, why didn't I know about this like before now?
About songwriting, or
about Radiohead?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I was just discovering bands really at the time. I was probably like, you know, 18 or 19 or something. And I it was like they made that record for me, you know. And I'm sure, you know, obviously half the world, lots of people felt that same way. Like, and that's the most beautiful thing about what we can do. It's like it can be so personal and so, you know, universal. And I know that's sort of almost a cliche at this point, but it's so true.
Well, and you've done it. Like you've now, you know, you had this idea that song sort of destroyed you, and you wished you could make music like that, and now you do make music like that. And for those of you
I don't know about that, but
for those of you who don't know Alex's music, there's one thing I do want to say, which is just that there's been at least one, if not two occasions where I've felt a little bit like, I don't know, jaded, or just like I was a little tired of music, or I don't even know how it happens because I love music, but it's happened that, and it happened like a year and a half ago. We played a show at the Arc in the Round, and Alex played a song, and I was sort of in one of those frames of mind, you know, like, okay, whatever. And then he played a song, and I was like, oh yeah, this is why I love music. Like this is like whatever he's doing is why I love it. It's like, and it's just something about the way that you create sound and words. It feels really like taking the listener to like the center of something in a really like gentle way. Like you don't beat people over the head with your music. It's just very exquisite, like an invitation to, I don't know, just be closer to what is or to yourself. So I'm a fan.
Thank you. That's really sweet to hear. Thank you, man.
So anyway, so check out Alex's music, but would you be willing to, on that note, share a song and tell us the story of how the song came to be?
Yeah, cool. Sure. Let me grab the old guitar here. Yeah, I guess I'll do this. It's the first single from my upcoming record, which comes out in February, but there's two singles out now. And it's a song called Show Yourself. And this, I guess, is sort of, it became the linchpin of the record, in that again, my journey sometimes feels a little backwards to me in music. And I shouldn't even say that with this, but for me, it feels like it's been a long path to get to this place of being, I guess, a solo creator, solo artist. And even though I've been making music for a long time, I kind of started out in bands, started out as a drummer, then discovered writing kind of later, and then had a couple projects as duos where I was sort of, one of two writers. And then I put a solo record out a few years ago, but it was under like a moniker. It was called A City on a Lake. And and even though I had done that and it was technically a solo record, there was still something that was blocking me from showing up under my own name, just sort of standing and claiming my space. And so this record that started working on a couple years ago was based on memories. It was based on sort of this. It started out because I had this sort of nagging fear about kind of missing parts of my childhood, like in terms of my memories. Like sometimes my sister would talk about a birthday party that I had when I was 9 or something, and she would describe it in great detail, and she's got sort of a steel trap memory, and I would just have like no recollection of it, and it freaked me out. And so but at the same time, I have these very vivid memories and detailed scenes from places I've never been and times that I don't think are from this life necessarily. And so there was sort of this contrast between those two things. And so I wanted to make a record to explore that. Usually what starts me writing is I have a question about something, I'm confused about something, and I have to write my way through it to just for myself, to help myself figure out what it is. And so I was thinking about my childhood, and I was thinking about why it was hard for me why I felt so much resistance to doing this record under my own name. And I kind of came across, I came to the fact that there was sort of these lessons that I picked up as a kid. And I think a lot of it had to do with sort of being a second generation minority growing up in the States. There's sort of, each generation figures out the rules of survival, I guess. And in my sister's generation, the sort of prevailing wisdom at the time was sort of to assimilate, to kind of, don't stick out, keep your head down. We were taught to speak English, so we didn't have an accent. And all those things were, the intention behind them were all beautiful, I guess, or they were meant to keep us safe. They were meant to make our life as easy as possible. And now I think as time went on, that changed, and now I don't think immigrant groups necessarily, I think there's more room to preserve culture and languages and stuff like that, which is, I think, wonderful. And I think it wasn't necessarily true that if you only speak English is the only way you're going to not have an accent or something. That was just sort of what people thought at the time. But it did sort of leave me with this other lesson, which was sort of to hide and to keep myself small, and to, to not want too much, or not to reach for too much. Kind of, there was this judgment around, ambition, especially in something like as self-indulgent, so to speak, as becoming an artist. It's like, those kinds of careers were not, they were considered selfish, and I had a lot of that baggage, and I had a lot of, I shouldn't, want this big dream. I should want this medium-sized dream, or I should not put myself out there too big, because that's taking up too much space, and that's selfish, or that's rude, or whatever. And I'm not saying anyone did it to me. It was just something that I started to pick up, and like you don't even realize it, but you start conditioning yourself, and you start acting accordingly. And so it was always a struggle for me, because I have my soul, or I had this drive to be an artist always, and there was this need to express, but at the same time there was this judgment pushing it down. And so there was always this struggle as I went through this career as an artist. And I think it manifested in being in, projects where I was maybe, a sideman, or being in a project where I was a duo, where, and those were important stepping stones, but also could become crutches, and it could become a thing where you've got this shield protecting you from the world, and even going into producing, which I adore and love, and I think it's one of my absolute callings, but it also was, without the outlet to have my own career as an artist, it became a little bit like the same thing, like a crutch, like it was like, standing next to the thing I wanted rather than doing the thing I wanted. And so that's like, it was a big, long, slow, difficult path. And so this song kind of came out of my own questions for myself with this journey.
That's amazing.
So,
thank you.
It's sort of a song about a game of hide and seek with myself. So, okay. Morning voice. Let's do this.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Close my eyes and I count to 10. You vanish just like you did back then, beneath the branches of the banyan tree. Oh, why do you still hide from me? The sun is low in the southern sky. Our shadows stretch into the night. I close my eyes and I count to 10. Do we have to play this game again? Show yourself, show yourself. Come out, wherever you are. Show yourself, show yourself. Come out, wherever you are, wherever you are. Monsters we keep out of sight still scratch at the door, go bump in the night. Wild things will not be tamed until we call them out by name. And I miss the sound of my father's chimes fading in the suburban breeze. Why do I run from what I used to be? Why am I hiding from my history? Show yourself, show yourself. Come out, wherever you are. Show yourself, show yourself. Come out, wherever you are, wherever you are, wherever you are. And ready or not, the morning comes. It shines a light on everyone. And ready or not, you'll see the truth. There is nobody chasing you. Show yourself, show yourself. Come out, wherever you are. Show yourself, show yourself. Come out, wherever you are. Show yourself, show yourself. Come out, wherever you are. Wherever you are, wherever you are, wherever you are, wherever you are.
Oh my goodness. Thank you.
Thunderous applause.
Thank you so much. Oh, so beautiful. I just love that song. Thank you so much. So for some of our listeners who are songwriters and other creative souls, as you were talking about that, I was relating to it. I'm not a second generation immigrant, but I was relating to it in terms of actually Catholicism. Because growing up Catholic, I remember being invited to sing at a wedding, but the priest made me stand behind a screen so no one could see me, and the implication being that like somehow it was like bad or selfish or like I don't even know, like just that there was something inherently like non-spiritual about like performing or sharing music, and so for me it was about examining that belief, like being like, well, why can't I be a vehicle for a spirit or a vehicle for love? Like, why is it that I need to be hidden because somehow, I don't know, like I'm bad, I'm not the priest, I don't know, it's just like, who knows exactly what the message was, but it was like kind of and that idea you were talking about like being an artist is selfish instead of being an artist is an act of service. Like, so for me, like, obviously when you put yourself out there, it always brings up all your shit, and so, excuse me, I don't even know if I'm allowed to swear on this, but anyway.
This is the internet. You're allowed to
I know, but like,
do it all.
Okay. So, and so I guess what my question to you for the people listening who may, have their own issues with hiding or get scared when they're starting to really put themselves out there, was there something that you feel like really helped you be able to show yourself more, or do you feel like it was just living your life an organic process that finally, obviously we're always working that edge, but is there anything that you would kind of advise as something that helped you?
I think with the artistry and also singing, for me, like I've never thought of myself as a singer. I have, in fact, that's part of it. Sort of parallels this journey where I sort of was almost actively discouraged to sing as a young person, and then sort of being an instrumentalist and being a percussionist. I was like in the back of the orchestra, and like that's just not a thing that you did, and I wasn't really around people who were kind of like encouraging me when I was younger to sing, and so I feel like I always had this tightness, always had sort of this tension, and I took singing lessons, but really the thing that every time I felt a big jump in my sort of like singing ability, it was always coupled with a personal development. It was always part of it was not about technique. It was not about, and I'm not saying technique is bad, or I mean, people with way more technical facility than me can certainly take a lesson and run with it in a way that I don't think I ever did. But I will say that my voice opened up every time I would kind of like hit some new phase of my own evolution as a person, as a human. That was the biggest thing that would affect my singing and also my artistry. And so, this record, I can tell you that the main motivator for it was was almost like a voice saying like this, it doesn't, you know, music aside and audience aside and, you know, the whole like sort of material results of a product aside, like this, you have to do this in order to get to the next level of your own personal development. Like this is something that you cannot push away anymore. You can't like ignore this thing that you have to, it's standing right in front of you. You have to climb over this thing to get to the next part of your evolution. And that was the main reason for me doing this this album, because no other, like it was just like, yeah, personal, you know, therapy exercise, I guess, or something.
I love that. I mean, I just want to like highlight what you're saying, because it's a pretty big deal. It's just kind of like, you know, there's no real like, I hear you saying like there's no real bypass. Like to improve as an artist, you have to grow as a human being. And so like you have this way where you're having a breakthrough in your personal evolution, and that's opening up your voice. And then you make the record, which is also probably further adding to your growth, you know, because you tended to it and you allowed it to come into existence. Would you say that's fair to say? Is that an accurate kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I think the act of doing the record, I mean, it was not an easy record for me to make. I produced, you know, I self-produced it, and I played most of the instruments. And so I was alone in this studio for most of, if not all of the time. And it was a long process. It was almost a year. And a lot of it was me like laying on the floor on my back, just feeling like, you know, in this sort of panicky, like, you know, I had to deal with a lot of shit that would come up, and personal, you know, demons and stuff. But another thing that happened, you know, so I wouldn't say that it was like I developed and then made the record and it was this, you know, victory lap or something. It was like the record was the exercise. And so it was not, I wouldn't say the most fun I've ever had, but it did always feel like important work for myself. And one thing that did happen during it was this voice started to pop up. He was like, I realized I needed a producer, and it was also important for me, and I can't really, I mean, maybe my next one I'll work with someone else, but for this one it was important for me to do this whole thing myself. But I was having that struggle because it's very hard to look outside of yourself as an artist, and excuse me. So I started hearing this voice come up, which was my own producer voice, because it's easy for me to have perspective when I'm working with another artist. I've spent lots of years doing that. I can see things really objectively, and, you know, when it's me, it was just a block. And so I started, I'm so sorry. I'm like, I have this lingering cough. But this voice, so I had my producer voice start to emerge, and I would actually have conversations out loud in the room with my producer self.
Oh yeah.
And I named this person. His name is Blue.
Okay.
And I would talk to Blue, and Blue was just this calm, cool, collected, even keel. Always just like, he was like, you got this. Like, he was very encouraging, very like, and he he talked me through, and that once that emerged, it kind of stuck with me, and I now regularly talk to Blue in other parts of my life. And
I love that. That's awesome.
And yeah, it's sort of like the loving part. Like, Blue would never say anything mean to me. He would never say anything, you know, he would never try to motivate me by criticism or by like berating me or anything. He's like very in my corner. And
I love
so
that.
now it's nice to have him with me in other parts of my life. And I think that's how it's always been for me. It's just, you know, it's a mirror, like my music stuff, art stuff, you know, it's always just you know, at its best, it's a reflection of wherever I am as a person.
Cool. I love that you shared that story about Blue. I think that's super important. And I feel like we often have many selves, and to be able to kind of tease them out, I think is a super helpful practice. And I think this is a great segue into what I wanted to ask you next, which is about production and mindset. So I'll just use myself as an example, as someone who, I'm a songwriting mentor. I teach songwriting, which I really more consider like being a midwife of songs, like asking people questions and listening to them, and, you know, really just honoring what they want to say. But sometimes, so when I meet with a student or a client, you know, we're coming from, you know, very, you know, like the hectic life. And, you know, they're like, okay, like I want to write this song, you know, and I'll be like, okay, you know, and I'll want to take a minute to just say, like, maybe we could just breathe for, you know, take a few deep breaths, or maybe just do a brief meditation, you know, and kind of just ask the song what it wants to be. Just something like that maybe only takes a minute or two, but in my experience will make all the difference for that following hour. The song will just sort of unfold, and there's a much more gentle way. But sometimes I can feel the resistance, like, well, I want to get started. Like, I want to make the most of this time, you know?
Totally.
And so sometimes I can feel in myself, like almost like a shyness or an embarrassment, like that I'm, you know, inviting them to take this moment of non-doing. Because I feel like the cultural, kind of like a cultural resistance or a societal resistance. But in my experience, when I do it that way, it always ends up better. So bringing that to you, what I wanted to ask, you know, you about, just to tell the listeners. So Alex produced 2 of my songs this past year. And one of the things that I really appreciated about his process is that, you know, before I went in to sing and play, he kind of led me, and I don't even remember the specifics, but Alex sort of led me through some breathing exercises, and we did a process where we removed obstacles, like any obstacles that might come up, you know, that could get in the way of the performance, or any like insecurities. I named them and we sort of let them go, and he did the same thing. And so then by the time I was singing, I felt like I was literally just channeling, you know, this voice. And I remember when my husband heard the tracks, Frank said, like, I've never heard you sing like this. And I thought, well, because I was ready, you know? And so what I wanted to ask you about that was, 1, you know, how did you come up with those exercises? And 2, like, where did you how did you cultivate the confidence to lead people through that process? Like, and not be like, oh, maybe they're going to think this is weird and woo woo, or, you know, just kind of like owning it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, those are great questions. Well, I'll address them in reverse order. I mean, I think cultivating the confidence for it takes time, and I definitely, you know, when I started doing it, I started it out of a practice I was just doing for myself that a friend actually taught me. He's a family friend he's an energetic psychic, and I have kind of used him almost like a therapist for myself for years. And he is he's very pragmatic. It's not very woo woo. It's very like, okay, well, what do we need to do, and what are the obstacles, and what are your actual drivers here, and what are the things what are your actual intentions, and are you seeing those, or are you seeing this other thing that you think is your intention, that sort of thing. And so one of the things that we do is clear. It's just it could be anything. It's basically like, you know, probably the same as prayer. It's probably the same as meditation. It's just naming it and using breath to clear, to move energy. So we would name, we kind of let ourselves, whatever would come up, come up. If it was, things that felt like they were blocking us, or things we were fearful of, just let them come up, name them, and and then move them. with our breath. And I think just doing something what always helps me is like, okay, I did a thing. I put my attention on this thing and I did an action and moved it. And, sometimes it's just seeing it. Sometimes it's like just naming it helps enough. And just to be like, yeah, that's the thing that's actually bothering me right now or is in my way. And so it was very effective for me. So I started doing it with artists that I was working with. And at first it's like, you have to, all of producing to me is about safety, and it's about sort of like making a person feel safe enough to take the risks that they need to take. And, creating that space, and that space looks different for every person. And so if I can, it was the more convinced I was for myself that this is a thing that is beneficial, it was easier for me to be like, to be like, trust me, come with me. Because that's what, if you have to have that as a producer, you have to earn that in every session or every project. At some point you have to, it's the same with like being a teacher of 7th graders. Like there's a point where you have to earn their respect or you lose it, and then it's really hard to get it back. Or with dogs, it's the same thing. It's like there's always a point where you're asking that person to trust you, and you have to lead them somewhere that's useful or beneficial, or so I think that just comes with, for me, it was experience, trusting in my own like abilities to get us from point A to point B, and trusting in the things that I started developing as my process. That's a really interesting question, because I used to have earlier I thought to make myself feel safe, I would have this really kind of rigid, I would in my head have a rigid process. Like I had to do things because I knew that this would work. If I put this formula in, then we would get this result and we have this record. But really what I was saying is like, I would be avoiding getting caught with my pants down and not knowing and looking bad and having shame. And so I had, I did have this process, and it was hard to deviate from that because I was afraid of looking bad, and it's because I wasn't confident enough in my abilities, or hadn't developed my skills yet to the point where I really did believe it. And I knew that I could get this thing where it needed to be. And as that developed, my process actually fell away. And I do have a process, but it's not as much like, it's not as tangible. It's like, now it's about like, the less I can plan at the beginning, the better. And that's where I feel the most open to letting a project really dictate where it wants to go, and letting the artist, the energy of the artist and me and the intentions dictate almost everything about what the sound is going to be, what the record's going to be. And that's a place where it's become really fun and like joyful, because the part of your brain that is the, concerned with the ego stuff kind of removes from the equation, and you can really be curious. And curiosity to me is very equivalent to love, and it's sort of like that energy is like the opposite of the fear energy that will kill a project.
Totally.
Totally,
I love that.
I think that with these exercises, it's like sometimes I feel a resistance from the artist, and it's like, I don't care. I'm not going to force the person to do it.
Right.
If it's not because I need to do it to make myself feel like I have this cool process. It's like, if they don't want to do it, we don't do it.
Right.
But I'm like, here's an invitation. This is a thing that is, you know, has been great for me, might be great for you. And most people are super into it because you offer it in the space where there's no downside to it, you know, other than like 10 minutes of your life.
Totally.
And that's the other point that you had brought up about getting to work right away. That was totally my conditioning. This whole culture of like busyness and this whole thing about like, you know, I always felt as I was defining my career as an artist, as a full-time, you know, artist, I always had that guilt about like, you know, this whole artist guilt of like, why do you deserve to be doing this? And so I had to make myself super busy all the time in order to justify my existence as an artist. So I would just be busy always and like just drowning always. And and it was like somehow that equaled like I was like, you know, worth something if I was just like working myself like hours wise to the bone. But that's so, it's actually really inefficient. And it took me a while to get to the point where 10 minutes of sitting down and doing this, you know, letting yourself receive something saves you like 2 hours of work later.
Totally.
You know, and being more project based, being like, okay, yeah, my goal today is to finish this song or to do this. Once I'm done, I'm done.
Yeah.
And I don't have to like sit down and pretend like I'm working for 3 more hours, like on my computer, just to feel okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
so that's a good takeaway. So sitting down for 10 minutes here can save me 2 hours later. I feel like that has held true. I know for me so many times. And also like people, like you're going into the studio, sometimes, and you're paying by the hour, or you've like set up the structure, like, well, you have to finish 3 songs in 3 days, but you still have to be able to be like, you know what, I'm not exactly sure how long this is going to take. And I'm just going to be in this present moment with this song and this chord and be with it, you know? So, and I feel like you've totally cultivated that, and you'd like reassure me. You're like, I'm not exactly sure how long this is going to take, but just trust me. I have to like, I have to do this. And I'd be like, oh, okay. Like, you know, thank you. Great. Sounds good.
I used to charge I had a day rate. And so, and because I thought that's what you did. And it sort of like motivated you in almost the opposite way. Like, it's almost like you have to make something take up this much time. It became time-based, and like, you know, now I'm a project rate, which is like, I will tell someone like, I hope this takes us half a day and we're done, and we can just like, you know, that would be amazing if we like have this thing that we are thrilled with and it took us half a day.
Right.
It usually doesn't. Who knows? Like you know, it all kind of evens out. But like, I would much rather be sort of chasing the right thing, and that's not about how it doesn't need to take minimum of 3 days to make this right thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Then you can go to dinner and like have a glass of wine, and you don't have to be like staying up till 3 a.m. Cool. Well, I want to ask you one more thing. One of the things I forgot to tell everybody at the beginning is that Alex had written to me last year and said he was watching the series, and he's like, I want to interview you. So we decided that today I would interview him and then he would interview me. But I do have one more question before you interview me, which is, do you want to share with us any more information about, you talked a little bit about your new record, but you're also writing this musical. Do you want to tell us anything about that, or when that's happening? Or
Sure. Yeah, I have 2 projects I'd love to tell people about. One, my record is coming out in February, and that's obviously super important to me. I have another record that just came out last week, which is a duo project with a guy named Jesse Terry, and that is a record called Kivalina, and it's like a concept album, basically based on stories from people from this town in Alaska called Kivalina. which is one of the first sort of North American towns to be really affected by climate change, to the point where they're going to be going, like the town is going to be underwater in about 8 years. And so we got really inspired / terrified by this story, and we started reading more about it, and we wrote a record based on a fictitious story that we were thinking of this couple that lived there. It's basically a breakup album with the backdrop of climate change, but it's about a couple who's living there, and one person wanting to, faced with this kind of like existential, threat, sort of like one person wants to sort of integrate into modern society and go move to Anchorage and sort of leave the identity of where they come from. The other person wants to preserve it and fight to preserve the culture that they're from. And the things that really affected us were not huge. It wasn't about images of polar bears floating on icebergs or glaciers falling into the ocean, although those are crazy. But it was more like, well, if the cemetery where our parents are buried goes underwater, like, how do we even, honor, like, what does that mean? Or if our identity is tied to a physical piece of land that we're from, and that land disappears, what does that mean? Where do our kids go to school, and who are we? Yeah. And that really hit me, because my family lives on the coast, and it's like, yeah, these are all things that are very, wow, not far-fetched things to think about. No. And the mundaneness of it really was like what hit me the hardest, like the practicalities. And so we wrote this record, and it's out now, and people can listen to it on all the things. Cool. And awesome. Yeah. And then the other project is a musical that I'm writing with Amber Rubarth, is another great artist, and it's called The Paper Raincoat. And that has been a long project. We started as a band. We actually wrote a record around this story that we'd started to make up, and we never finished the story. We toured as a band for a couple of years, a few years, and then stopped doing that, and we started to pick up trying to finish the story, and we ended up finishing it in musical form. And so cool. We had our first production in Berkeley at the Osher Theater in June, and we're going to be recording an album of the music for that this winter. Cool. Do you have dates for when the next show will be, or not yet? The next production? No, we don't. Okay. We're going to do the album first, and then. Okay. So if you haven't heard The Paper Raincoat, they're so great, and they have a bunch of music online already. Yeah. And then just keep your eyes open for that. So that's so cool. Alex, you have so many wonderful collaborations going on and your own stuff. It's like super exciting. I can't wait to listen to all of this music and to see the show. I'm feeling like in the spirit of being in the moment, and how you talked about production and just going with what's happening, I feel like we've gone a little bit long. So I think I'm going to end this episode, and then we'll do the other episode separate in a minute. So please go, Alex, is your website alexwong.com or? It's Alex Wong Sounds. Alex Wong Sounds. So please check him out. He's amazing. And thank you for all of your wisdom that you shared with us today. And bye. Thank you for having me. Thanks so much for joining us. If you know someone who would enjoy or benefit from this podcast, please share it with them. Thanks so much. Much love.